Welcome into the Trevor Staub Show, episode number 36. Today, we have our very first reoccurring guest on the show. We've done 35 episodes, have had a new guest each week, but it was time for a reoccurring guest because Brodie's in town. So anytime we can do in-studio guests, it just makes sense and it's a lot of fun. So thank you for coming in, Brodie.
Yeah, of course. Number 35.
36.
36.
There you go.
Heck yeah.
35 is how old you are.
That is true.
Yep.
Jeez.
Anyways, moving on. So we're going to go ahead and kind of do this as like a season recap for Brodie. I knew I wanted to have him on as a reoccurring guest once the season was over and we could kind of digest it as a whole. As we move into the off season, the show will definitely get a little bit, we've always had guests scattered throughout the show that are, not always just who won a recent tournament, but that is certainly a lot of the guests that we try to get on the show to keep it relevant. And as we move into the off season, now that's going to change a little bit. We might get people who are signing new deals, or just interesting people from the sport that are making moves. But for now, we're going to do a season recap, and that could be something else we do as well with Brodie. So kind of just to start off here, let's just get before we go into anything specific, just an overall impression of the season, just generic scale. How did it go for you? How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, there's ups and downs for sure. I felt like I had some solid tournament finishes. And if you look at just kind of first rounds, second rounds, there was definitely a lot of tournaments where I was in the mix early on, and then I'd either fade or you kind of later in the season was more kind of was out of it the first little bit, and then I kind of battled back to kind of cash or whatnot. So I didn't have too many tournaments this year where I felt like I was consistent throughout. But also that was kind of a little of my thought process coming in. I was playing a lot more aggressive this year than I was last year. And obviously, there's stats out there that show me having one of the highest birdie percentages, but also being on the list of having one of the highest bogey percentages.
Right.
So that was kind of the thought going in this year was I was definitely going to play more aggressive, definitely play to the point of where if you're playing well, you can win. But I just didn't. I was not as consistent as I wanted to be. And then also, I think this season, I want to say, I don't even know, it might have been a little bit before European Open. I was starting to have some back issues.
Yeah.
And it limited me on my practice. So that was kind of a bummer. Is I had to kind of pick and choose what I was going to work on just because I couldn't kind of overdo it. And I think you can kind of see that with some of my results with putting, for example. I was one of the worst putters on tour for a stretch of the season. And that was kind of my circle one putting was kind of what kept me in some of the cash lines in the previous years. Mm-hmm. So I was able to grind that out and get that back to decent the last stretch of the season. But yeah, I mean, I think it's easy too, if you do try to compare, this is where I think, especially for younger players and stuff that are getting on tour for the first time, you can't really compare what you did last year to what you did this year because the tour is completely different. So a 25th place last year at, let's say, Las Vegas does not equate to a 25th place at Las Vegas this year. If you play as good as you did last year in Vegas, you're going to drop down to 35th, maybe even 40th. Because there's just that many more players. And it's also, just if you're in that middle section, there's so many more people in that middle section. So there's a chance that you're not going to cash at some of these events. So can't really look at finishing place this year, for me at least. Obviously the top guys are the top guys, right? So they didn't really fall off too much. But for me, there's just so many more people in the mix to where if I do play not my greatest, I'm going to fall so much farther down the leaderboard than last year.
That makes sense. Yeah. So now getting into more specifics, obviously you had some individual goals that you had set for yourself prior to the season. Do you want to kind of go over those goals and which ones you were able to hit and which ones you weren't?
Yeah, I think obviously setting goals for yourself is great. And I'm a huge fan of actually writing them down and something that you can kind of constantly go back to and look at and see how you're doing. So my goals were this year they're pretty basic, I would say. Next year I might kind of venture off into doing a couple couple more goals that are like more off the course stuff.
Okay.
But this year they're all on the course. Now the only thing I would say is like our stats aren't necessarily like, I don't 100% guaranteed to be the facts, I guess would be the way of looking at it.
There's some that are a little misleading.
There's some times where like you'll finish a round and be like, man, I putted really well. And then it'll look and be like, they said that you missed like 2 putts inside the circle when in fact those were outside or whatever, right? We have volunteers doing it, so it's tough to have them all realistic, but we're just going to take what, my UDIS stats stay as the best, was the best we got. So the first one I had on here was to make a lead or chase card at an elite series. So this was something I had yet to do going into the season. And this was more of just like, I knew I was going to be on some feature cards playing with some great players, but I wanted to put myself in that position of like either after the first round coming out and having a great first round and being in the mix, or, later in the tournament kind of fighting my way up the leaderboard to maybe a chase card.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of those I was on throughout the year, but I was able to do that. So that was great. My next one obviously was to win an event. Every event I go into, I'm trying to win. I wasn't close other than I would say a handful, maybe 2 events I probably had like an outside shot at. But there was definitely a handful of events too where coming off that first round, I was right there.
Right.
I put myself in a position to where if I had another 2 good rounds or 3 good rounds, I didn't shoot myself in the foot after the first round, but still looking for that first win, which would be incredible on tour. Then we got a top 10 in elite series, which would be an elite event next year. We got that. We got 2 of those this year. So that was great. A top 20 at a major. So, this is again one of those where it's not that much different than elite events.
Yeah.
But going into a major, everyone knows the elevated pressure and stuff. The fields aren't really that much different. Now, I think I only got this at
European,
which was probably the weakest field out of all 4 majors this year. But that was also a tournament too that like going into, I was 50-50 on whether or not I'd even play. So I was happy that with my performance there, even in a weaker field. And then we got some more X's here. So lower than 10% OB rate. That was something that kind of plagued me all season. Like I said, I was being aggressive this year, throwing a lot of shots that maybe in the past I would have played a little bit more safer. I was not lower than 10. My stats say 12.6%. So a little bit higher there. I wanted to be higher than 40% in Circle 1 regulation. That was close at 36%. This one I was way off, and this is a really good stat. 70% Circle 2 in reg. So I was at 56, which is pretty low. And what this tells me is like there's just some rounds where I'm just not throwing the disc well enough to where I'm giving myself chances.
Yeah.
And that, Nevin, if you look at my tour championship, that was that round to a T where it just felt like I was literally giving myself 2 or 3 birdie looks. And, to be competitive, that's just gotta be so much higher. Another one was higher than 85% Circle 1X. Now, a lot of these stats too, I was kind of going off of what I did the previous year and what I thought like in the off season I could improve on to get better at. This was one where it would have been interesting to see what my Circle 1X putting was the last couple tournaments. But that was at 78%.
Yeah. So
like I said, that was something that kind of plagued me all season was my Circle 1X putting. Higher than 25% in Circle 2 putts. I got that this year, which is a major improvement from last year.
Yeah.
Qualify for the Tour Championship. I got that. Qualify for USDGC. I got that. And then I wanted to finish the year top 30 in the world for like UDisc. Did not get that. And I'm starting to think the UDisc one's really hard for me to get.
You maybe
next
the odds
year,
are against you.
Yeah,
for sure.
Maybe next year it might be a little bit easier for me to move up, but there was a lot of tournaments where I'd finish higher, like decently higher than what my world ranking was, and I'd like fall like 4 or 5 spots.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of players in the UDisc rankings, because the UDisc rankings, if everybody had been playing the same amount of time, would be really good. It'd be really good. The problem is they do have that bias towards players who have played for a while. Like, it's hard to slip in the rankings, especially if you're a player like Eagle or Sexton that doesn't play a lot, or Eagle was hurt, but they just don't really slip. Kale LaVisca is another one like that. So I think you are one of the like highest differences of average finishing place to world ranking that are in there. But I think like one more really good finish would jump you. You just got to get like that one jump.
Well, I think too, it's also like, if I get 6th place at a tournament, but I don't beat any of the top guys, like all the top guys do well, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Versus like if I get 6th place at a tournament and all the people that beat me are just randos, essentially, not randos, but you know what I'm saying, like, and I end up beating people that are really highly ranked. That's where I think there's a little bit of a flaw in that, because a 6th place should be a 6th place regardless. It should be more about like who's in the field, not who you beat.
Right.
Because like you beating Paul, Ricky, and Eagle and getting 6 doesn't mean you played any better than you getting 6 and you beat Simon, Garrett Gerthy, and
those other guys just not know how to play as well.
Yeah, they just had it off. So, but regardless, those were all my goals this year. I'll tinker with it. I'll probably post something on social media with it as well, and kind of just do like maybe a little bit more of a recap, sitting down with the thoughts. But yeah, I mean, I'm not too upset with it. Like I said, like I wish I could have nailed a couple more of those stats. Some of those stats were pretty bad. But overall, some of the big ones on there, the Tour Championship was a big one. USCGC is always going to be a big one to me. Getting those always feels great.
I was going to say, it seems like you have like all of the little like fundamental statistic goals, and then you have, you know, the big ones, finishing places, qualifications, and you seem to hit most of the big ones, the ones that really stick out in the season, but it's those little ones that like, that's what gets you to, you know, the winner's circle.
To winning, yeah.
So like that's definitely frustrating to know that, like, you know, it probably almost looking at those stats at the beginning of the year, you probably even thought some of those statistics would be a lot easier than like top 20 at a major. Like those ones are almost more difficult to achieve, and you were actually able to get those. So looking back on those tournaments, you mentioned, you know, there's a handful of times that you were in it. Is there any like 1 or 2 tournaments that like if you could go back and just replay, like have one back, like where's one that like sticks out to you? Like, oh, that's one I would love to have back because I really squandered an opportunity.
That's a good question. I feel like the first one that jumps off, and just obviously this might be some recency bias, but the first one that jumps off is probably GMC, because I ended up playing a really good round on Fox Run the final day, and then a really good round the first day, I believe, on Brewster. And if I was able to do that again for the other 2 rounds, because I ended up playing really bad the second time out at Brewster, and the first time at Fox Run I played really bad. So like that's one where it's like, man, you know, if I just go out and play like mediocre those 2 rounds, who knows where I could have put in the mix. And then the other one that obviously jumps out at me is just DDO. Now obviously the weather there was kind of it kind of almost made you have to throw the tournament out. The only thing I guess you could say is like Ricky still won and Simon got second.
Yeah.
So it's like it wasn't a complete like, you know,
right.
Who the heck is finishing these tournaments kind of thing, or where the weather was just so crazy. But that one was obviously the one that was closest to tasting victory for the first time. And I just had I laid a goose egg on the final day. Like I just could not figure out how to find the fairway. Everything that I had going into that final round was just gone. And I was able to, I mean, really, if you go back and watch that round, like I dropped from, you know, being on lead card going into the final day, I want to say like around hole 14 or something, I was like outside the top 20.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I birdied that last stretch, those last 4 holes, I birdied all 4 coming in, which are some tough holes with, you know, 16, 17, 18 especially, that kind of shot me back up to third. But yeah, that one was tough because I really did feel like going into that round that I had a decent chance. Now, obviously, Ricky had a lead and he ended up playing pretty well. But again, like it's, you know, I like my shot whenever I have, a chance to kind of put some pressure on someone. And in that round, Ricky has never had pressure.
Right.
Like everyone on lead kind of was falling off early, and he had a good start, and then he was kind of able just to kind of coast to the victory. So I would have loved to have that taken back to put a little pressure on him early on and see what would have happened.
Yeah. So you mentioned, like being able to climb back in that tournament. And I think one of the themes from your season that you don't really see out of a lot of disc golfers was your ability to, even in tournaments where, I think a lot of disc golfers get discouraged when they get far away from cash or far away from winning. But in a lot of tournaments where you would be struggling late in a tournament, you'd be able to climb back, and not even just in final rounds, but any round. You would have a really struggling start, but then be able to climb back at the end and like just kind of leave the rest of the round behind. And I think, if there was a stat for somebody whoever, I guess it goes into the birdie bogey percentage thing, but like as far as having like comeback rounds, I like late in the round success after a bad start, I think you might have led the tour in that, honestly. Was that something that you were really pleased with this year? And like kind of what is your mindset and process with that? Yeah.
I think that's one thing that I have an advantage over a lot of people in the field is just like, I don't quit. I don't give up. I think that is mentally difficult to do. Like you said, there's some people that will have a bad first or second round and feel like they're just out of it and have no chance of cashing or no chance for whatever. For me, it's like, I just have to adjust my goals, right? So my goal initially, day one, come in, win the tournament.
Yeah.
I'm not stupid. So there are times where I'll come in and shoot around that's 10 or 12 shots off the lead. And now the goal for the next day is not necessarily like, okay, win the tournament. Now the goal is like, okay, put yourself in a position where you maybe can get a top 10. Right. And then you kind of just continue to adjust, because I think if you come in with a goal that's high, and that's not a bad thing, but if you don't have the round that maybe can get you to that goal, if you're just like, okay, well, this tournament's over, I'm not going to be able to do it, I think it's easy to kind of check out. And especially too, like people that are like in the hunt, right? Like if you're in the hunt and your goal is to win and then you start off slow, I think it's easy for a lot of people to check out and just be like, well, I don't care if I don't. Like this whole mentality, to me, whenever I hear this talked about, like, I don't know if this is what people actually believe, but like you hear people say like, oh, well, if they don't win, they don't care. And like that whole mentality to me is like wild. Well, like obviously, like if I don't win, I'm gonna be upset. Like I want to win,
right?
But like, what is that to say about your character? That if you don't have a chance of winning, that you're just gonna like take your ball and go home, and just like, no, like some days you're gonna show up and you're not gonna have your best game, and it's like, okay, what can I do to like salvage this? And that's what I was doing all season. It felt like I was just like, what can I do to salvage this tournament? Like what can I like small little goals and stuff to try to make it to where leaving this tournament I can say, you know what, you battled, you fought out there, you gave it everything you got, and this is where you finished. And I think it's way easier in a sport like disc golf, where it is an individual sport, and it isn't like mano y mano, to just kind of like, just pack it in and just say on to the next one.
Right.
Where it's a lot harder to do that obviously in a team sport because you're letting down your teammates, and obviously a lot harder to do that in a sport where like you're literally going head to head against someone. To just pack it in like that. But yeah, like to me, like that's just never an option. And sometimes it is hard. It's definitely harder sometimes if you're on a course that you just don't like, or the tournament for whatever reason, the weather's not great for what you like to play in. Like there's a lot of reasons for you to be able to just pack it in. But I think like being able to fight through that and stuff, I think that will build you up to where you can become a better disc golfer down the road.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I think that a lot of players get stuck on goals and don't even think to like literally in your mind change your goal going into the next round, because I think that if you're going in trying to win, like you mentioned, and you play bad that first round, just telling yourself like, okay, I'm not chasing that anymore. I'm chasing a top 10, which is still a good result, or whatever it might be. Like that can immediately give you confidence knowing that, hey, tomorrow I'm playing for something. I have something to like really, really go for. And it's still it's still a good result. I think a lot of players get hung up on, it's hard because disc golf has been changing so much as far as the field strength. I think it's really hard for a lot of the top players to adjust their mindset because they came from an era where the win or go home like strategy would win half or a third of the time for a lot of those players. Like they could think that way because they knew they were going to collect half of the wins or whatever. So I think that's just going to be, it's going to be adjustment as the purses raise too. And those money drops get a little more severe. I think that's going to come into effect. Whereas like before, the cashing difference wasn't that big, where now, you see it in the tour championship. There's like putts that are worth a couple $1,000 USDGC, just the drop offs there. I think that's going to people are going to start realizing like, hey, now that we can make like pretty good money just from tournament earnings, every little stroke matters at this point. Like it could be worth my next car payment. That could be the difference. So
yeah, I would say too, like the social media pressures and more eyes on the sport definitely are causing more stress, right? And I think, back in the day, maybe you have a bad tournament and you kind of slip down the leaderboard and then like no one says anything, right? Because no one even knows that you're even playing the tournament.
Right.
Where now we're seeing people getting called out for their finishes, like what happened. And I think too, like there is this almost idea of like, if you don't finish, if you don't win, if you don't get a top 10, like you have to come up with some sort of excuse of like why that happened. Like, oh, my back, or oh, I stubbed my toe this morning, or I woke up and I had a cold, or like you have to have a reason. And
when
it's
in
like,
reality it's just golf.
Like it's okay. Yeah, it's okay to have off tournaments. There are going to be times you don't have to say like I got so unlucky on the course today, or I had 4 spit outs, or you can literally just say like I didn't putt that well this tournament, or I was just inconsistent off the tee. Like I feel, and I think too, fans also, you'll see this of where someone finishes and like the fans are almost like giving them like, oh, something had to have happened.
Yeah.
Like what, like maybe, oh, they had a birthday party they were planning and like they were like probably stressed out about that, where again, it's okay to just say like they had an off tournament, and maybe sometimes there's gonna be an off month of where they just don't have performances for an entire month. And I think you're starting to see that more, like you said, like when the competition in the field wasn't as deep, you could have an off day and still finish in the top 5.
Right.
Now, if you have an off day, you might be finishing outside the top 20. If you're not one of the top guys, you might not even be cashing. So I think it's okay, especially if you're a newer player and you're like trying to get some hype around your name and people, I think being authentic is like the most important thing. Mm-hmm. So instead of trying to like build this persona of like you're invincible and whenever you play bad, it's because of some other outside factor and it's never because of you. I think people respect you coming out and just saying like, yeah, I putted terrible today. That's something that I got to work on. I got to put in some time to get better at putting. No,
I definitely agree with that. So kind of moving forward toward looking to next year, being on the Pro Tour has continually evolved. The touring experience is changing along with the strength of field. Everything is kind of with the broadcast, the way the events are handled, everything has kind of been moving along. What are some great things that you saw on tour this year that you really liked from the Pro Tour, and then some things that you'd like to see implemented or changed moving into next year?
So the one I would say is just like they're expanding of their coverage, right? Yeah. So I think we're seeing certain tournaments, they would have standalone cameras essentially, of where they were able just to get multiple people's shots. And so if someone did get an ace or someone did throw a great shot, even though they weren't on lead or chase card, you were still able to see that. And then also I like the ability that they have like that runner now, to where if someone on 4th or 5th card, and heck, even someone like when the tournament just starts, right? And they're not on a feature card and they start popping off or having a good round, they do a great job of getting cameras on those people. Yeah. And I think that's important. I think it's important that if just because you're not on feature card or just because you're not on lead or chase, knowing that you can go out and play well and get some coverage, I think is huge, especially for like the newer kind of players that maybe haven't broke through to where they get those feature cards. Right. I love that. I think that's great. I think they also are like tinkering obviously with the commentary team. I think Brian has been a great addition, what he's added to being on, the grounds. And also an interesting thing too, something that maybe the tour will look into in the past is like, maybe the way that they're currently doing commentary is a little backwards. So right now they're doing like people in the booth kind of saying what's going on and like what's happening, and then going down to the person on the grounds for like more additional stuff, versus it should probably be the opposite of where Brian is setting the stage and saying what the shot is requiring and all that stuff, and the booth is adding to that.
Yeah.
Because like Brian is there, so he can say like, yeah, you know, and he, you know, you can get real close to where he's got that like that sick golfer voice where he's like,
right.
yeah, he's got 250 out. He's got 2 trees that he needs to beat here. The tricky thing with this green is like if he comes in with a hyzer too much, it could hit and, you know, get that roll away.
Yeah.
And then it goes to the booth and they're like, yeah, right now he's got, you know, today so far he's thrown inside the green all 5 times. He's looking to make another chance, and, you know, like you can just add to it,
right?
Versus them trying. They're still trying to obviously figure it out, but there is a lot of times where like not being on the grounds, it's tough. And in disc golf too, especially with some of these courses, it really is difficult to actually have an idea of what's going on with how new a lot of these courses are. That was the other thing. A lot of these courses are really, really new this year. So if you've never played them before, but outside of that, I think they did a great job too with like the tour card this year. I think that was great with parking. Parking was a lot more separated this year than in the past. And I knew that was a big issue for player safety and all that. And we were trying to find a negative thing. Is that was
anything
like
that you want
something
to change,
prove on?
something to change, maybe.
Something to change,
if any. I mean, it seemed like they ran a pretty smooth tour this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think
a lot of the stuff, like you mentioned with commentary and things like that, like I think that, in my opinion, what I've seen from the Pro Tour this year, especially with the broadcast, but really with a lot of things have been handled. A lot of things from like logistics side of like the player relations in the tour and like tour card and that kind of thing. I think a lot of that is just a slow implementation on purpose. Yeah. But from the broadcast side, I think that the personalities have really started to find their groove. Like I really liked commentary overall this year. And I think that the camera setup and the switchers have gotten really good. I think that at this point with that, their main holdback is just money. Like as they get more money, like being able to switch back and forth with Brian effectively. Like Brian told me about what their setup is. It gets as good as they can do. But I think once they have more funding, and if they could not be as satellite like that, like things like that will make a huge difference. But I think that's what a lot of it comes down to. Yeah. And it's really crazy to just see the product that they're able to do with impressive
with what they have. Because I just went to this award show and we walked through the production truck, and it was, I mean, it was like 100x what the Disc Golf Network has. Yeah. And that was just for some, award show. Yeah. So it's like, what product they're getting with what they're using is incredible. And that's why I feel pretty confident that as more money is coming in and more sponsorships, we've seen now, this is the second year that we've seen some big outside disc golf companies come in for the Tour Championship. We had Barbasol this year, which was great. And hopefully, that integration and that marketing with them was well done. And they will, they would either extend it to next year or even maybe extend it to some other events this year. But yeah, I think that's been great. I think working with a lot of the local clubs and TDs and everything with all the other tournaments has been awesome. As long as that continues, of where there's just continual growth each year and continued improvement, I think the Pro Tour especially is in good hands. I feel pretty strongly to say that moving forward, and it's just exciting to kind of see what the next couple of years could maybe have in store for us. Honestly, definitely. So heading into the off season now, obviously there's some goals that are kind of obvious that you're going to work on in the off season, putting being the main one. But are there any like more nuanced type shots, any kind of like maybe little parts of the game that add up that you're going to be really targeting this off season to gain a few strokes next year? Yeah, I think the big one for me is just like the straight backhand. I feel pretty good if it's like in the woods and I'm able to throw like a meteor or something like that, kind of like full power. It's more the really USDGC was the course that kind of showed that flaw. So you have like hole 1, you have hole 4, you have 18's tee shot, you have hole 7. There's a lot of holes on that course where like a straight backhand is the desired throw.
Yeah.
And I was shying away from it. So being able to have that not 100% power straight backhand, I think is going to be something I'm going to work a lot on this offseason. And then the other one would be my forehand hyzer flip with like drivers.
Yeah.
That was something that I saw at Nevin, especially, was a super useful tool to have. And I feel confident in that with my zones. I don't feel as confident with my fairway drivers or drivers. So it's like, and really honestly, it's like finding the right disc. Right. That really what it boils down to. Cause right now I just don't think I have the right disc for that shot. And then the last one would just be the flex forehand. That's something I'm constantly trying to add into my game. Yeah. And I think that opens up a lot of new shots if you can pull that off. And that's my thing, is I don't want to have a game where I'm limited of where, this is a flex forehand hole. And it's like, well, I'm going to try to like throw a hyzer flip backhand because my hyzer flip backhand's better than my flip. I want to try to have an overall across the board game. And I think you can see that too from my results, is like, I'm not performing well just in open courses, some of the wooded courses as well. I had some of the best rounds out there, whether it be at Maple Hill or Brewster or, Idlewild or wherever. I want to be able to compete at every course on tour next year. And I think not limiting yourself is the only way to do that. And obviously putting. That's huge. If you watch the Tour Championship, if you watch these last USDGC, if you watch these events coming in, if you want to compete, you got to be making putts consistently inside of 60 feet.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Would you say that that bumping up C1X putting, and then it's going to be those 40 to 60 foot putts are going to be a huge focus?
Yeah. I mean, that's going to be massive. It's just like being able to consistently, it's not even so much consistently make them. It's like consistently giving them a chance. Like that's the thing, is like a lot of times from like 50 feet, the disc has no chance to even go in.
Right. So
it's like consistently just giving it a run to where it has a chance to go in if everything is done correctly.
Yeah.
But it's just having that confidence too, because like right now, it's so funny how disc golf, like the growth happens, because it wasn't that long ago that me stepping up to like a 33 footer, like just inside the circle, in my head, I was like, I don't know about this. Where like this year, stepping up to that putt, I'm like, this has to go in the basket.
Yeah, you got to make it.
I have to make this. And that's where right now, like that 50-foot line is where I'm like, I don't know about this, where I want to get to the point of where it's like, this has to go in the basket. Right. This has to hit metal. Like that's like the mindset is like, I have to get this on target.
Yeah, I think those top guys, their putting from that distance has gotten to the point where because they're giving it a chance on almost every putt, and that's how they have those days where they just don't miss.
Correct.
Like it's just going to click some of those times, and then all of them are just going to start falling. Isaac Robinson and Gannon Burr are two guys that have had days like that. But yeah, it's certainly the putting distance of like required makes is just increasing very quickly.
Yeah, they're like, I don't know about this range is like 80 or 90.
Yeah,
like,
it's certainly
You got to get better at putting to be competitive.
As is always with golf, it seems.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think we're gonna leave it there. We're gonna wrap it up. Thanks, Brodie, for coming on the show. Be here next Thursday. We're gonna have another great guest. We may have more reoccurring guests as we kind of move into the off season. If there's somebody in particular that you want me to bring back that I've had on before, I'm now kind of open to that as I've gotten through an entire season of episodes. But we're also gonna look for some really unique and cool guests. But I'm always open to suggestions, so make sure to leave them in the comments and be here next Thursday. We'll have another great guest. We'll see you then.